Okay, we're going to start off by looking at this example that we had last time. I hope you'll look at this. What we're going to do is we're going to come up with a ERD, entity relationship diagram. The data in this database would be defined. First of all, let's look to see what's wrong. All right. The idea here is we have a computer listed. So one line represents one computer. And we have for it the code of the building that the computer is in and the room number that the computer is in. And we have the description of the room, the year the computer was purchased, and a list of 3 applications that are installed on the computer. Now, there's several things wrong here according to our normalization rules. First of all, there's repeating fields. I have 3 spots for applications, but as we might know, a computer could have many more than 3 applications here. What do you do then? Well, you might think, well, we add another column and another column and another column for more applications. The problem is there's always going to hit, if you have a certain number of applications, there's always going to be, well, what if it has one more than that? We could put 50 applications on here, but what happens if you try to put the 51st application on here? So repeated fields are bad. Another thing that's bad is when data in the table doesn't depend only on the particular row that it's in, on the particular primary key. So computer 1, BU106 is an open lab. Computer 2, BU106 is open lab. It's not like the description of BU106 is going to be different for computer 1 versus computer 2. Both of them are looking at BU106. All right. And therefore the description ought to be the same. Likewise, the description of business building only depends on the building that we're in. So the description of the building name only depends on the building we're in, not the particular computer. So I would have something like this if I was doing this. I'm going to draw an entity relation diagram where we show the tables and the relationships. First table I would have would be the computer table. It has a relationship with the room table. The room table has a relationship with the building table. And the computer has a many-to-many relationship with applications. So one computer could have many applications. A given application could be on many computers. So I would have a computer application table. I would give each of these a primary key of ID. So this would have computer ID. This would have computer application ID. This would have application ID. This would have room ID, and this would have building ID. We would then have a description for these two, and a description for this one. One computer has one room that it's in, but a given room could have multiple computers. That means that there's a one-to-many relationship between room and computers. And therefore, since computers on the many side, we'll have a room ID stored in this table. One room is in one building, but a building can have many rooms. Therefore, we're going to have a building ID in the room table because the many side points to the one. In this table, computer can have many applications, and an application can be on many computers. So this will have both a computer ID and a application ID. I think the only other thing we're missing is the year that it was purchased. And if we do that, we have all the tables with all the information, but now spread out in these tables. And so look at the difference between the two. If the description of BU 106 changes, in this scenario, we only have to change the description in the one table. In this data, we would have to change the description in two places. Problem with doing things where you have to change multiple things when one item changes, there's always going to be a chance that you're not going to change everything, and the result will be that there'll be inconsistencies in your data. We would establish foreign keys so that a computer could not be defined as being in a room that didn't exist. A room could not be defined as part of a building that didn't exist. So that is sort of the solution of this problem. Make sure that you understand that. Okay. We're going to get into a really important example today. And the example relates to the entity framework. And we're going to build a very simple application that allows users to enter in movie information. And we're going to store it in a database. We're going to do it using what's called the model first approach. In the model first approach, we create classes in C# that correspond to all of our entities and tables and columns and relationships and everything in the database. So we're going to create these classes, and these classes are collectively called the model. We're going to use that model to generate the database. So we're not going into any database management system and creating the database that way. We can do that. There's another approach, which you might be able to guess. It's called database first, where we create the database first and the database generates those classes in C#. Right? There's just two directions to go to. And generally speaking, if you're starting off from scratch, my opinion would be it's most advantageous to create the model first. So that's the form that we're going to use in this class. These are classes in C# that describe or model the database entities. Or I should just say the entities in our project. Our programs then, whether it be the razor pages or the code behinds, the models, are going to manipulate the database by doing things to these classes. So we're not going to write statements directly to affect the database. We're not, for example, going to write a SQL insert statement or a SQL select statement. We'll create commands in these classes, though, that translate into database operations like insert, update, delete, select, and so on. So that's what we're going to do, and that's what we're going to do in this example. We're going to create an empty application. We're going to create, in the tutorial today, we're going to create one class. We're going to then generate the database. And then we're going to run these pages so that when, by interacting with these classes, we can update and insert and delete and select items from that database. So I'm going to go through this. Part of your assignment this week is to also go through this and to add another table to it. So take what I'm doing today, which I should be able to get through today, and you'll add another table to it. So let me bring up the tutorial. And some of the things I'm going to emphasize, some of the things I'm going to not emphasize. This sort of shows us the end product that we're going to have. When we're done, we're going to have an index page that allows you to see a list of movies, to search for movies, and to add, edit, see the details of, or delete a movie. That's sort of our ending picture of what we're going to have when we're done. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the Razor Page web app, run the app, and see the files that we get. We've sort of done this already, but it probably pays to repeat. I'm going to start Visual Studio 2022. I'm going to go up here and say New Project. The project I want is an ASP.NET Core web app. And if you read it, it says a project template for creating an ASP.NET Core application with example ASP.NET Razor pages. So that is the project that we want. Next, I get to choose what I'm going to call this. And they tell you to call it what in the example? They say to call it Razor Pages Movie. So to be consistent, I'll create it that way. Razor Pages Movie. We have a location that we can put it. I'm not going to put it there. I'm going to put it on the desktop. And we're going to place the solution in the same directory as we're placing our code. So I'll leave that checked. Click Next. Framework we're going to use is .NET 6.0. Authentication type is none. We're not going to require logging on for this application. We will cover how to do that later on. For now, we're not going to have any authentication. And we're ready. We can click Create. Visual Studio will do its thing. And it will give us our application. In a second here. I'm going to click here to view Solution Explorer. So I see all the files that it creates over here. We've done this already. We have our layout file, we have our index file, we have a privacy page, we have an error page, and so on. If we go out and look on the disk for this, we'll see in the folder that I created, all those files, bin, object, pages, properties, www, as well as these control files. Now we've talked about this already. This should be reviewed for you because this is how we created our empty Razor page site to begin with. And if we run this, we'll get what should be familiar to you now. Keep in mind, when you turn this in, if I was done with this assignment, I would zip up the project folder and turn in the entire project folder. Don't just turn in pages or classes or whatever. You have to turn in the whole application. This works as a unit. So now if I go and run this, I get some warnings. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And we get my application. All right. Looks a little bit different than it does in the tutorial. I'll show you what it looks like in the tutorial. It might look a little bit different, but we have our home page, we have our privacy notice, and so on. Remember, these pages are comprised of part of it coming from the layout page, part of it coming from the individual page. So this page here, which is index.cshtml, this part of it is from the index.cshtml. The other part of it is from the layout in the shared files. Okay, that's what we've done in previous examples, all well and good. Now we're ready to do more. First thing I'm going to do, and I should follow along this just to make sure I don't get anything out of order. They talk about these files, and I'm not going to right now, but when you're reviewing this, review in the tutorial to see what the contents of these files are. It gives you an overview of what these files are. Now we're going to add a model. What is a model? A model is a C# class that represents one of the entities in our application. So this is an application that deals with movies. So we could have a bunch of entities. We could have movies, we could have actors, we could have film studios, we could have ratings, you know, whether it's G, PG, PG-13 or whatever. But there's any number of different entities we could have. We're going to start off with one. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a models folder. So I'm going to go here, right mouse, and I'm going to add folder, and I'm going to call that folder models. This is where we're going to put all our models. All of our C# classes that represent entities within our application. Now, keep in mind that entities in an application more or less translates to a database table. Not precisely, but more or less translates to a database table. All right. Within this, I'm going to right mouse, and I'm going to say add, and I'm going to add a new item, and I'm going to choose to add a C# class. Where did we find that? A class, right up here. And what name are we going to give it? We're going to give it the name of movie. So I'm going to call it movie.cs. Because this is going to contain information about the movie entity. So there we have this field. Now we're going to edit that class. And for this, I'm not going to sit here and type. I'm going to just copy what they have. So I'll press copy. I'll go into my movies class, and I will paste this in here. We're not going to go over this in great detail because I want you to understand the process of creating a table, then generating some razor pages that allow us to manipulate that. We're using this library, this package, which we'll take advantage of at some point, not necessarily right now. We have public class movie, and all we have is a bunch of attributes. We have an ID, we have a title, where the default is an empty string. We have a date, we have a string for genre, where the default is empty, and we have a decimal for price. And we've generated the appropriate gets and sets for them, so these are C# attributes. Right along. Now, this is going to be used to generate a table in our database. The table is going to be called movie. The primary key to it is going to be ID. How do we know that this is going to be a primary key? Because when we generate the database, it's going to make some assumptions. It's going to make the assumption that any field called ID is probably the primary key. Now we can verify that in the database once it's generated, but it makes some assumptions. Likewise, if I called this movie ID, it would make that assumption that that is the primary key. Okay. Next step is scaffolding. All right. And there's some things to install here. I don't know if, strictly speaking, this is required. I'm going to try skipping it, and I would assume it's going to work anyhow. All right, I'm going to go into Pages and create a folder for my movies pages. Now, one thing that took me a long time to get, this folder you create should not be the identical as the C# model class. In this case, the C# model class is called movies.cs. Movie, rather, singular. When I created this folder, I called it movies. So usually follow that convention. Make the model singular because the model represents one member of that entity. And make the pages plural. But those names should be different, because if they're not different, you run into difficulty. At least I have in the past. All right. Now I'm going to go and generate some scaffolded items. Okay. What are scaffolded items? They're sort of like templates. They're going to take the information in this model and generate a page that does a list of all the elements in the database, all the rows in the database. A page that allows you to insert, a page that allows you to update, a page that allows you to view, and a page that allows you to delete. So this gives you a good head start in doing an application. So this is very important. Now, we're not simply going to generate this and use them without understanding how they work. We are going to take some time to understand the code that it generates. But this is a good way to get started on the application. So I'm going to right mouse here, and I'm going to say add new scaffold item. And I have a number of choices of things I can scaffold. I'm going to pick razor pages using entity framework, CRUD. All right, that's an unfortunate acronym, and it means create, read, update, and delete. So it's the basic table manipulation, the basic things that you want to do to a table. You want to be able to read the table and either show me one item from the table or show me multiple items from the table. You want to be able to create an item, that is, insert into the database. We want to be able to update. We want to be able to delete. So I'm going to click Add. What model class are we going to use? We only have one. We're going to use the movie model class. What is our data context class? And this is important. The data context class is essentially the name that we're going to give to our database. And we should just be able to click the plus sign and we get it. Now, what you're going to do for lab 1 is you're going to repeat this tutorial. You're going to repeat everything that I'm doing so far. And then you're going to add another entity, an entity for actors. All right? And you don't have to create any relationship between movies and actors. You just have to add it as a separate entity. When you do so, it's important that you create using the same data context class because we want everything to be in one database. It'll ask us if there's a layout page that we want to use. Yeah, we want to use the default, so we can just leave it. I'm going to click Add, and it's going to do its thing. It's smart enough to know that we need to install some packages. That's probably the step I omitted, where it asked me to add them manually. But it's actually scaffolding. What's a scaffold in real life? A scaffold is something you use and you can build upon it. You can use it to build upon something else. So it's like a head start. You might put up a scaffold if you want to change the, update the roof of a place. So a scaffold is something you can stand on to build upon. And we're done. Now notice what we get. We get, in the movies folder, we get a create CSS_HTML and the model, a delete the model, details and the model, edit in the model, and index in the model. So we get generated for us 5 pages that do the basic database operations. We'll come back and look at these in more detail after we finish through the steps of this. Now, we're almost ready to go. We've created our model. We've scaffolded some web pages. That is, we made some template or default, however you want to put it, web pages. Now we have to actually update the database. So we have to actually create the database, and we do that. The way that we update a database is we create a migration, and then we update the database. Think of a migration as being an update to the database. For example, this is our initial update. We need to create a migration and then update the database. Let's say we go and make a change to this application. We add another model in, for example, and we scaffold that model like you will do with actors. You'll then create a migration to say update for actors. And that migration will just contain the changes to the database, the changes to the model / database that you made since the last migration. So I'm going to go into you get Package Manager Console. This is where we run the commands that's related to creating migrations, actually updating the database. So first line I'm going to do, I'm going to add a migration, and I'm going to call it initial migration. What this is doing effectively is this is syncing up the database with our model. Remember in this diagram, we've done this part. We've created our classes. We've generated web pages. What we need to do now is generate the database. That's what we're going to do by creating the migration and updating the database. So add dash migration, initial migration. I click return. It thinks about it for a while and gave me a warning, but it's not a real important warning. I then need to update the database, and I can do that by typing in update database. And what this does is this actually syncs up the database with our model. And because they're in sync, then when I write code that accesses this model, I'm actually accessing the database. It thinks about it, it succeeds. It shows us how it updated the database. All right. Now, let's go and look at the database that got generated. All right. We go up to View, and I'm going to pick SQL Server Object Explorer. And I can look here for my project under local DB. There's my database. So I went under SQL Server, underneath local DB, because this is a local database. I have my database. If I click on that, I can see the tables that exist. And the table that exists is DBO movie. I double click that. I can see all the fields. These fields match the model that we've created here. It knows that that's the ID. It knows that that is a character. This is a date. This is a decimal. So our database matches up with our model. That's exactly what we wanted to do. Now when we run our code, we're going to see all these pages. But first, we have to put them on the navigation. Please make sure you do this. It's very difficult. It's a pain to grade if you don't include it in your navigation. So just consider that a requirement every single time you do this. How do I do this? I go back to my layout file. I look here and I can copy this LI. And instead of typing in home index, I'm going to do /movies index. So I'm going to go to one of my movie pages and I want to call up the index page. That'll be this one. So now we're going to run this. Everything should be all set. There, sure enough, in the navigation, we have movies, privacy, home. Click on movies, we come to this page. Well, we don't have any movies added yet, so therefore, it starts out blank. I can click on new. So this is the index page. I click on new, and I get taken to the create page, where I could put in the name of a movie, the release date, I don't remember. I think it was 1939. Genre, call it fantasy. Price, we'll call it $18. And I click create. It's added to the database. There it is. Click edit. I can make changes to it. I actually think it's called The Wizard of Oz. So I'll add the word the. I click details. I see everything about that movie. I click delete. I can delete it if I want to or not delete it. This is something worth celebrating. All right, because we made a very simple database table and can interact with it without us really writing any code other than the model. And we have achieved that through that model first approach, where we create our model, generate the database, and scaffold basic pages from the model that we've created. One thing I suggested to people, I'm going to test something because someone had a question. I'm going to add style to my layout file. And I'm just going to make the body yellow. Remember, we talked about this before. There's a bunch of style sheets in play here. And sometimes they overwrite the style code that we put in. Let's run this and see what we get. Just as I thought, it's yellow, but this navigation isn't yellow. You might be able to do this. If I put into the UL that has our navigation an inline style, It did part of it. We would have to move that up a layer to do the whole thing. So let's put it on the div. The reason that this works is because inline styles overrule any external defined styles. Oh, still only did that. I'll be darned. Oh, wait a minute. Put it up here on the container. Yep, did a little bit more of it. I think you can see how you can use that to override. We'll put it up here finally. Fail. Let's try moving it here. Oh, well, so our best attempt was here. Right there. Still has that little bit of white. Anyhow, that's another technique that you can use. And again, it didn't work exactly as I wanted it to, but it is useful to define an inline style like that. Now, you might say in the past, you've always told us to avoid inline styles. That's true. Think of the reason I told you to avoid it, though. The reason I told you to avoid that on individual pages is you don't want to have to go back and change it on every single page. But because in this case, I made the change to the one layout file, all my changes are isolated to one place anyhow. So I wonder if I literally added it to everything here, if that would. I'm not going to do that. You can try that if you're at all interested. The other thing you can do, of course, is to get rid of this bootstrap and write your own CSS to begin, from the start. And that's also a valid answer. Okay, so let me make sure you understand your assignment. Your assignment is to go in and repeat everything I did. Now, there's more to the tutorial that I'm not going to go over, all right, today. They give you some things to look at. Take the time to look at them, even if they're not entirely clear exactly what it does. It'll show you sort of the anatomy of those pages, and we'll look at that next time. Show you the database like we did last time. It'll teach you how to seed the database. To start off with, if it's empty, to show you you know, to start off with a certain number of rows in the database if it's empty. Right? Instead of just our one there, you could put in a list of movies so that the first time you run it, it initializes the movie table. I'm going to get to this in a second. Adding search. All right. Next thing you'll do with this tutorial is follow the instructions. They're pretty good to add a search so that you can search by title for a movie. And it shows you the instructions to do that. So you can search for the title. Or you can search by genre. All right. After you get that completed and running, where you've done what I've done, you've added the search to it, and then you add on the, then you go in and add the actor table. How will you add on the actor table? Well, you will do just like we did with the movie table. We'll go into models. We'll right mouse. We'll say add. New item. We'll pick class. We'll call it model.cs. I'm sorry, actor.cs. We'll add the attributes for an actor. And you can use this as a model of what attributes might be there for an actor. You'll then go and create in the pages a folder for actors. Okay? Then you'll go and scaffold new pages using the actors model. Be sure to use the same DB context name, though, that you used originally, because we don't want two databases. We just want the one database that contains everything for this application. If you get stuck at all during this, let me know. The one thing I do want to mention to you is I am available for help, and I can meet with you online. There's certainly the office hours that exist after the class that you can meet with me in person or online, but I'm also available at other times too. You know, this is a blended class and we only have one lecture period a week. That doesn't mean that I'm only working one day a week. I'm available for this class at other times too, if you just contact me and make arrangements. Generally speaking, I can accommodate most people's needs for when they need to meet me. So we can meet online to review this and handle any questions or problems that you run into. Are there any questions now? All right, that's all I had for today. Have fun with this. This is where the real work of the class starts. Please, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Please read through in Canvas the module that relates to project. And let me know if you have any questions about it next week. Your project will be like in many of my other classes where you have a design that's completed and then the final project. The design instructions show you what you need to create and how you need to create it. It'll be similar to what you did in CISS243, where you will have the strategy, scope, structure, wireframe, prototype. The addition, though, the big addition for this is that you will need to define an ERD. Where is that listed somewhere? Oh, here we go, under requirements. You will create an ERD for the database that will allow you to address the requirements. All right, be sure to review that before next class, and I'll be taking questions and might spend a few minutes on that as well. If you don't have any further questions, I will see you next week or in lab.